The sun hung low over Lagos, painting the skyline in dusty orange hues. It was the kind of afternoon where sweat clung to the skin and the air smelled of diesel and roasted plantains. In the heart of the bustling city, Amaka Okoro balanced a heavy cement block on her shoulder. Her hands were callous, her clothes stained with dust, but her spirit remained unbroken. She had just dropped the block by the construction trench when she saw it, a brown leather wallet lying half buried in the sand. Her brow furrowed. She picked it up, brushed off the dust, and opened it. Inside was a black credit card, an ID that read Chinedu Obi, and a thick bundle of Naira notes. A voice in her mind whispered, "You could keep this. No one would know." But another part, stronger, clearer, reminded her of her late mother's voice. Do the right thing, even when it hurts. Amaka stood still for a moment. Then slowly, she bent down and dropped the block she was carrying. She wiped the sweat from her face with the back of her hand, dusted off her skirt, and turned around. A man stood across the street, watching her closely. He wore simple jeans and a gray T-shirt, but something about him felt calm, powerful, even. "Did you drop this?" Amaka asked, raising the wallet. He crossed the street with careful steps and took the wallet gently from her hand. "Yes," he said, sounding surprised. "I didn't even notice it was missing." "You're lucky I saw it," she said with a small smile, trying to hide how tired she was. He studied her face. "What's your name?" "Amaka." "I'm Chinedu." "Thank you." "Amaka." He looked around at the noisy, dusty site. "Are you working here?" She nodded. "I've been here for almost 3 months, helping mix cement, carry blocks, whatever I can do." Chinedu stared at her a moment longer, then said softly, "Come with me." Amaka looked down at her worn clothes, her dusty sandals, and then back up at him. "I'm not dressed properly." He smiled warmly. "You're perfect just the way you are." Without another word, he led her to his car, clean, white, and air-conditioned. She hesitated before getting in, her hands brushing self-consciously over her blouse. They drove through the busy roads of Lagos until they reached a quiet street lined with glass-fronted boutiques. He parked in front of one that looked too elegant for someone like her. "This place is expensive," she said under her breath. Chinedu opened the door and gestured for her to step out. "Come on." Inside, the boutique was filled with soft music, cool air, and clothes that shimmered under the lights. A young woman with short curly hair greeted them. "Pick something nice," Chinedu said. Amaka froze. Her eyes moved from one price tag to another. Everything looked too shiny, too clean, too not for her. "Sir, I can't," she said. "These clothes are too expensive." Chinedu's voice was calm but firm. "This isn't to impress you. I just want you to feel seen. You helped me. Let me help you." Amaka stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then she nodded slowly and walked around the store. She picked a few dresses, modest but beautiful, and a pair of simple flats. The shopkeeper watched her with kind eyes, but said nothing. After the shopping, Chinedu took her to a quiet restaurant. The place had soft lights, wooden chairs, and a slow ceiling fan spinning above their heads. They sat near a window, away from the crowd. Amaka sat across from him, still unsure how to feel. She hadn't eaten in hours, but her appetite had disappeared beneath a swirl of confusion and disbelief. Chinedu folded his hands on the table. "May I know more about you?" Amaka looked at her hands for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I lost my parents in a car crash when I was 12, she began. "After that, I had to raise my siblings, Amaka and Chioma. I was just a child myself, but someone had to be strong." Chinedu's smile faded. He sat still, listening intently. "I've done everything: housekeeping, hawking on the street, cleaning toilets. Then I started learning construction work. I don't love it, but it pays better. And my siblings are both in school now. That's what matters." Chinedu leaned forward. "You're the strongest woman I've ever met." Amaka looked down and gave a shy smile. "I'm just doing my best." For a moment, they sat in silence. But in that quiet space, something began to grow. Something gentle. Something real. That night, long after he dropped her off, Chinedu lay in bed staring at the ceiling. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about how she found his wallet and returned it, about her quiet strength, about how she carried so much on her small shoulders. How does someone go through so much and still smile like that? By morning, he had made up his mind. He called his personal assistant. "I need you to find out where Amaka Okoro lives," he said. "Everything. I want to pay her a surprise visit." "Yes, sir," came the immediate reply. 3 days later, his assistant returned with the information. She lives in a one-room apartment with a shared bathroom. Her rent is usually late. She stays with her siblings, Amaka and Chinedu, 20 and 18. "It's not a fancy place, sir." Chinedu closed his eyes. His chest felt tight. Later that evening, he dressed down in a plain shirt and drove toward the area. But he didn't park close. He parked a few streets away and walked. He wanted to see it all for himself. As he got closer to the compound, he stopped. There, by a small tap in front of the building, was Amaka. She was squatting beside a plastic basin, washing clothes. Soap bubbles floated in the air, and water dripped from her elbows. It was simple. It was pure. Chinedu took a deep breath. Then he called out, "Amaka." She looked up, eyes wide. Shock filled her face. "Sir?" she gasped, standing quickly. "You came here? How did you find my house?" Chinedu smiled and walked closer. "I asked a few questions and followed the answers," he said gently. "I just wanted to see where the angel who helped me lives." Amaka let out a shy smile. "Please take a seat," she said, pointing to a low bench in front of the house. She quickly wiped her hands on her wrapper and went inside. When she returned, she carried a tray with a plate of noodles and fried eggs. "It's not much," she said softly, placing it in front of him. Chinedu took a bite. "This is amazing," he said, smiling. Amaka sat beside him quietly. They ate together, the air filled with the scent of soap, spices, and something new, something fragile and full of promise. And in that dusty compound with worn walls and borrowed benches, something beautiful began. The following day, the sun returned with its usual Lagos fire, baking the rooftops and steaming the streets. Yet inside his glass-walled office in Victoria Island, Chinedu Obi sat lost in thought, completely disconnected from the buzzing conversations of his board members. "Sir, should we proceed with the Koi development update?" his assistant asked. Chinedu blinked, returning to the present. Yes, go ahead," he replied, though his mind was still across town. With Amaka, he could still picture her sitting beside that plastic bowl, soap bubbles dancing in the air like innocent dreams. Her hands, roughened by years of labor, had prepared him a simple meal with such care. She hadn't tried to impress him. She didn't flatter or beg. She simply gave. That evening, after wrapping up a long day of meetings and reports, Chinedu did something spontaneous. He drove back to the boutique they had visited days earlier and picked out 2 more sets of dresses, modest but elegant, along with shoes in Amaka's size. Then he called his driver and told him to drop the package at her address, with no name attached. Just a note that read, "You deserve to be seen. A friend." Meanwhile, in the small apartment Amaka shared with Amaka and Chinedu, the atmosphere was shifting. Her siblings had noticed her quiet smiles, the sudden sparkle in her eyes, and the fact that she'd been humming while cooking. "Sis," Chinedu said as she stirred a pot of okra soup, "you've been acting different." Amaka glanced over from where she was sweeping. "Different how?" "Like you're not carrying the world on your head anymore," Amaka added, stepping in with a grin. She chuckled. "I'm just grateful. God has been kind." That was when the knock came. Chinedu opened the door, and a man in uniform handed her a fancy shopping bag and left. Confused, they all gathered around as Amaka opened it slowly. Her hand trembled as she pulled out the dresses. Chinedu gasped, "Ha! Sister, these are rich people's clothes." "There's a note," Amaka said, reaching into the bag and reading it aloud. Amaka read the words again to herself. "You deserve to be seen." Her lips parted slightly. She knew exactly who had sent it. Chinedu. She pressed the clothes to her chest and exhaled deeply. No man had ever treated her with such quiet respect, not with pity or performance, but with something real, 2 days later, Chinedu called her again. Amaka, his deep voice came through. Can I take you somewhere? I promise. It won't be uncomfortable. Amaka hesitated. Where? You'll see. She agreed. When he came to pick her up, she was wearing one of the new dresses, simple navy blue with lace trimmings and soft flats. Her braids were wrapped neatly in a scarf. She looked elegant, but she still walked with the modesty of someone who had known hardship. Chinedu opened the car door for her with a smile. You look beautiful. She blushed. Thank you, sir. Just Chinedu, he corrected gently. They drove to a quiet waterfront park tucked away in Lekki. It wasn't crowded, just a few families having picnics and kids flying kites. Chinedu led her to a small gazebo near the water, where a simple picnic basket waited. Did you plan all this? She asked, eyes wide. He nodded. I thought you deserve a place with peace. You give so much to others. I wanted to give you a moment to breathe. They sat side by side, their feet brushing the soft grass as the water lapped gently nearby. The city noise was distant here, as though the world had paused for them. Do you ever rest? Chinedu asked her as they ate suya and sipped zobo from glass bottles. Amaka smiled faintly. Rest became a luxury after my parents died. He looked at her, not with pity, but admiration. She told him more about the accident that claimed their parents, how she dropped out of school to feed her siblings, the days she hawked sachet water in traffic, the landlord who once kicked them out in the middle of the rainy season, the odd jobs, the tears cried quietly at night when her siblings were asleep. I never wanted them to see me break, she whispered. Chinedu reached across the table and took her hand. You didn't break, he said. You became a foundation. They sat in silence after that, both looking at the rippling water. That night, Amaka walked into her compound glowing, her face lit by something beyond the streetlights. Chioma peeked out from the window and squealed. She's back, and she's glowing like an angel. Sister Amaka, Amaka teased, stepping outside with his hands on his waist like a town crier. Tell us, how does love taste? Stop it. Amaka laughed, swatting at him, but her siblings weren't wrong. Something was changing in her, back in his apartment. Chinedu was not smiling. He was pacing. He had received a letter, one from a woman named Adora, someone he hadn't spoken to in years. The letter was short, typed, and cold. Chinedu, I hear you're getting close to someone. Congratulations. But before you commit to another woman, maybe you should know I'm carrying your child. Chinedu dropped into a chair, his breath caught in his throat. No, he muttered. His heart began to pound, not because of fear, but confusion. He hadn't seen Adora in over 10 months, and the last time they spoke, they had agreed to go separate ways for good. So why now? Why this? He picked up his phone, heart racing, but stopped himself. Not yet. He needed to think, to verify. But one thing was sure. This couldn't ruin what he had just begun to build with Amaka. Across town, Amaka stood by her window, looking out at the stars. She didn't know why her heart suddenly felt uneasy, like something was on the way that would test her peace. But she held on to a prayer whispered into the night. God, please don't let this be another illusion. The next morning, Amaka Okoro woke up before the alarm. The sky outside was still dark, the early hush of Lagos before the city roared to life. She tiptoed past Chioma and Amaka, who were still asleep on their mat, and stepped outside into the compound. By the tap stood her familiar plastic basin. She filled it halfway and began to wash. The water was cold, but her hands moved in rhythm, wringing, scrubbing, rinsing. Soap bubbles floated lazily in the air, catching the dawn's faint light. This was her ritual, her quiet, her peace. But she didn't know that someone had come to find her again. Chinedu Obi stood a street away, dressed in a casual shirt and jeans, his black baseball cap pulled low. He had parked several blocks down, not wanting to draw attention. He needed to see her world again, not from a car window, not from secondhand reports, but with his own eyes. As he turned the corner, he spotted her. There she was, Amaka, kneeling beside a basin, her headscarf tied loosely, her fingers red from scrubbing. She sang softly under her breath, a tune he didn't know, but one that wrapped around his heart like thread. There were no cameras, no fancy dinners, no bouquets, just a girl and her soap bubbles. And still, she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Amaka," he called gently. She looked up, startled. Her hands paused mid-scrub, water dripping from her fingers. Her eyes widened. "Chinedu," she gasped, standing quickly. "What are you doing here? How did you find my house again?" He smiled and stepped closer. "I asked a few questions and followed the answers." "But why?" "I wanted to surprise you," he said. "I wanted to see where the angel who helped me lives." Amaka's cheeks flushed. She wiped her hands on a small towel and pointed toward the wooden bench near the wall. "Please sit. Let me clean it for you." He sat without hesitation, and she disappeared briefly into the house. When she returned, she carried a small tray with a steaming plate of noodles topped with fried eggs. "It's not much," she said shyly. "Just something small." He took a bite. "This is better than anything I've had in a 5-star hotel." She laughed lightly. "Ah, Olga, you're just saying that." "No," he replied, looking into her eyes. "I mean it." They sat side by side in that quiet compound, the morning sun rising slowly behind them from one of the nearby windows. Amaka peeked out sleepily, then quickly nudged Chioma awake. "Sis is outside with the guy again." Chioma rushed to the window and gasped. "He's here?" "He actually came." Their eyes widened as they watched their sister and Chinedu laughing like old friends. "I think something serious is going on," Amaka said. "No be think." "I know," Chioma whispered, "and I pray it's not a dream." Later that afternoon, back at his apartment, Chinedu paced the room. His assistant, Kingsley, watched him curiously. "Sir, everything okay?" Chinedu paused. "I want you to contact a reliable real estate agent." "All right, sir." "I need a fully furnished 2-bedroom apartment. Safe location. Quiet. Somewhere decent. Ikate or Gungi, maybe." Kingsley blinked. "For you, sir?" "No," Chinedu said. "For Amaka." There was a pause. Kingsley nodded. "Consider it done." The apartment was ready in 5 days. It wasn't extravagant, but it was everything Amaka had never imagined for herself. Cream-colored walls, soft lighting, plush furniture, and a small garden outside the window. The kitchen gleamed with new utensils, and the bedrooms had full wardrobes. Chinedu stood in the living room with the agent, inspecting the details. "Make sure the keys are ready by tomorrow," he said. "I'm bringing her here myself." The next evening, Amaka stepped into Chinedu's car, curious but calm. "Where are we going?" she asked. Chinedu smiled but said nothing. "You're always full of surprises." He just winked. They drove through Victoria Island, then Lekki, then turned into a serene estate with tall trees, neat fences, and smartly dressed security men at the gate. Amaka's eyebrows furrowed. "This place is fine. Oh." Chinedu parked in front of a cream-painted bungalow with a small green patch in front. Amaka looked around, then turned to him. "Sir, what are we doing here?" Chinedu got out of the car and opened her door. "Come." She stepped out slowly, confused. "This," he said, pulling a bunch of keys from his pocket, "is your new home." Amaka froze. "My what?" "For you and your siblings. It's all paid for. No more rent stress. No more leaking roofs. No more shared bathrooms." Her hands flew to her mouth. "I don't understand. Why would you do this?" Chinedu looked into her eyes. "Because you deserve to be seen. You didn't just return my wallet. You returned my faith in people." Amaka sank to her knees, her hands trembling. I can't repay you for this." "You already have," he whispered. 2 days later, another surprise followed, but this time not for Amaka. Chinedu drove out with Mama Nkechi, his old nanny whom he'd taken in months earlier when he saw her homeless near CMS bus stop. She sat in the front seat, wrapped in her neat lace wrapper, her black handbag clutched tightly. "My son, you're dressing me up again today. Where are we going?" "You'll see, Mommy." They drove for nearly an hour and pulled up in front of a white and brown bungalow tied with a red ribbon. Caroline was already waiting quietly at the gate. Mama and Ketchy looked around. Aha, what are we doing here? Chinedu walked to her and placed a key in her palm. This is your house now, Mommy. No more sleeping outside. No more tears. This is your home. The old woman stared at him, stunned. Then she dropped to her knees and began to cry. God will bless you. God will lift you. Your children will never lack. Chinedu lifted her up gently. Don't kneel. Your family. Amaka stood by the side, her eyes filled with tears. You're a good man, Chinedu, she said softly. You don't just give. You see people. Chinedu turned to her. Sometimes, the true test of wealth is how much light you bring into someone else's dark moment. Inside the house, everything was new. The air smelled fresh. The walls glowed with warmth. Mama and Ketchy moved from room to room, her wrinkled hands touching the curtains, the sink, the soft bed. It's all mine, she whispered. Yes, Chinedu said, and you'll have a housekeeper, monthly support, and peace for the rest of your days. She sobbed into his shoulder. From the corner, Amaka watched them. Her heart was full, but little did she know that the greatest twist of her life was just around the corner, waiting in the form of a woman from Chinedu's past. The days that followed were golden. Amaka Okoro settled into new apartment, like a bird discovering its first nest. The bedroom smelled of fresh polish, the bed soft as clouds. Chioma, wide-eyed, had cried the first night. Amaka walked from room to room, as though he couldn't believe the space was real. Big, sis, he said. Do you think this place is truly ours? Amaka had smiled a soft, grateful smile. It is, thanks to Chinedu. Yet deep down, she still moved gently, like someone afraid the dream would shatter if she walked too loud. Meanwhile, Chinedu Obi watched from the sidelines, giving her space but never far. He saw how she folded napkins before placing them on the table, how she checked on her siblings before every outing, how her eyes lit up when she saw sunflowers in the estate garden. And every time he saw her, just being herself, he fell deeper, but he also knew time was ticking. A part of his past was lingering, like a shadow waiting to stretch into the present. He hadn't responded to Ada Ora's letter yet, not because he didn't care, but because it didn't feel real. Something about the tone, the timing, seemed off. He needed facts, not fear. So he hired a private investigator, and then he waited. One Saturday morning, Chinedu woke up with clarity in his chest. The weather was calm. The skies were blue. It felt like a day meant for something bold. He walked to the guest room where Mama and Ketchy was staying and knocked gently. Mommy, he called, please dress up. There's somewhere I want to take you. She answered through the door, warm and curious. Okay, my son, give me a few minutes. While she got ready, Chinedu picked up his phone and called Amaka. Yes, sir? Her voice came through. He smiled. Can you meet me at the old construction site? The place where we met. She didn't ask questions. She just replied, okay, I'll be there. By the time Mama and Ketchy emerged from her room, dressed in her gold-lace wrapper and low sandals, Chinedu already had the engine running. You haven't told me where we're going, she said, chuckling as she stepped into the car. You'll see soon, he replied with a secret smile. They drove out of town a little, down a quiet road framed by trees. At the end of the street stood a freshly painted 3-bedroom bungalow, white and brown, with a small garden swaying in the breeze and a bold red ribbon across the front door. Amaka was already there, waiting. Her face glowed in the late morning sun. As they parked, Chinedu stepped out, walked to the passenger side, and opened the door for Mama and Ketchy. Come, he said gently. She stepped out, squinting at the house. What is this place? She asked. Chinedu took her hand and led her to the door. Then he pulled a key from his coat and placed it in her palm. This is your house, Mommy. No more rent. No more begging. No more sleeping under bridges. She stared at him, tears brimming. Then, Chinedu, what are you saying? I mean it. This is your home now. The old woman dropped to her knees. Thank you, God. Thank you, my son. May you never lack. May your children never know pain. Chinedu knelt beside her, lifting her up carefully. Please don't kneel. You took care of me when my own parents were busy. You were my comfort. Now it's my turn. Amaka watched, her eyes glistening. Then, something unexpected happened. Chinedu turned to her slowly. His hand reached into his coat pocket, and when it came out, it held a small red box. Amaka's breath caught. The old woman gasped, already covering her mouth in joy. Chinedu stepped forward and dropped to one knee. You came into my life in simple clothes, he said, his voice steady, but with the cleanest heart I've ever known. I didn't expect to meet someone like you. Someone who gives without expecting. Someone who loves without asking for anything. Amaka's eyes widened. Her hands trembled. She glanced at Mama and Kechi, who was already nodding through joyful tears. I see strength in you, Chinedu continued. I see home, and I want to spend my life building something with you. Will you marry me? The world stood still for a heartbeat. Then Amaka whispered, Yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger as Mama and Kechi burst into praise songs, raising her hands toward the sky. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Chinedu called his parents, Obina and Obi, in the U.S. Dad, Mom, I'm engaged. There was silence, then a shriek. What? Are you serious? Ngozi shouted through the phone. Chinedu laughed. Yes, and I want you to meet her. She's with you now, his father asked. Chinedu passed the phone to Amaka. Good evening, Ma, she said gently. My dear, you're even more polite than I imagined. Ngozi exclaimed, You must be special. My son has never sounded this joyful before. Amaka smiled shyly. Thank you, Ma. I'm grateful to be part of his life. You'll be family soon, Obina added. I already feel like I am, she replied softly. A date was picked for the wedding. Invitations were sent. The tailor worked overtime. Chioma and Amaka helped with every detail. But just 1 week before the big day, a visitor arrived uninvited. Her name, Adora Uma. She showed up at Chinedu's office in a tight-fitting gown and dark sunglasses. His secretary, unsure of what to do, ushered her in. Chinedu, she said, folding her arms. We need to talk. He stood up slowly. Adora, why are you here? You've been avoiding my letters. My calls. He kept his tone calm. Because I don't believe you. She raised a brow. You think I'd lie about carrying your child? You and I broke up nearly a year ago. You said you were done. Now you show up days before my wedding. She dropped a white envelope on the table. That's a medical report. The baby is due in 3 months. Chinedu stared at it. You're not as clean as you pretend, she said coolly. I wonder what your bride would think. Then she walked out. Chinedu stood frozen, a storm of doubt and disbelief brewing in his chest. He hadn't told Amaka about Adora. He didn't want shadows cast on their sunshine. But now the past was back, and it could cost him everything. The days leading up to the wedding should have been filled with joy. But in Chinedu Obi's heart, a storm had begun to brew. The envelope Adora left behind sat unopened on his desk. It felt like a ticking bomb. He stared at it for hours, unsure whether to read it or burn it. Finally, he called Kingsley. Sir, his assistant answered, voice sharp as always. Find out everything about Adora Uma's claim. Discreetly. Yes, sir. Give me 48 hours. Chinedu leaned back, rubbing his forehead. He had kept Amaka in the light since the first day. There had been no lies between them. But this was not a secret. This was a test. One he had to pass without losing her. Meanwhile, Amaka stood in her new kitchen, arranging plates with Chioma and Mama and Kechi. The home smelled of pepper soup and fresh detergent. Laughter bounced off the walls. Amaka was in the living room with Chinedu's cousins from the east who had flown in ahead of the wedding. You know, Chioma said, dusting off a ceramic plate, this house still doesn't feel real. Amaka smiled. It's our home now. Mama and Kechi looked up, her eyes soft. And soon we'll call you Lolo Obi, she teased. Amaka chuckled, her heart light. For the first time in years, she was living, not just surviving. But that night, while folding laundry in her room, Amaka noticed something. Chinedu hadn't called all day. She checked her phone again. Nothing. A subtle unease began to creep in. Across the city, Chinedu met Kingsley in a quiet cafe. His assistant slid a manila folder across the table. "Sir, I spoke with 2 private doctors in Abuja. Ador was treated for miscarriage from months ago." Chinedu's heart dropped. "Are you certain?" "Yes. She was never pregnant when she sent that first letter. The report she gave you is fabricated." Chinedu let out a long breath. She wanted to ruin the wedding. Kingsley nodded. "And if you had reacted out of fear, you might have lost Amaka." Chinedu stood up without another word and drove straight to Amaka's apartment. When she opened the door and saw him, her relief was visible. "Chinedu," he stepped in, pulled her gently into his arms, and held her close. "I have to tell you something," he said, his voice quiet. She looked up. "Someone from my past came back. A woman. She claimed she was pregnant." Amaka's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. "And," she asked softly, "it wasn't true," he continued. "I investigated. She faked everything. She wanted to stop this. Us." Silence fell between them. Amaka slowly reached for his hand. "Thank you for telling me. You're not angry? I'm human. I feel things. But what matters is that you came here to tell the truth. That's love." Chinedu cupped her cheek. "You are everything I prayed for but never imagined I'd find." The wedding plans resumed with renewed joy. Chinedu's parents, Obinna and Obi, arrived from the U.S. 3 days before the big day. Amaka and her siblings stood at the arrival gate at the airport, hearts racing. When Ngozi saw Amaka, she gasped and grabbed her husband's arm. "Obinna, look, she's even more beautiful in person." Chinedu smiled. "Mom, Dad, meet Amaka?" Ngozi hugged her immediately. "My dear, thank you for loving our son." Obinna gave her a warm handshake. "Welcome to the family. Amaka." They all drove back to Chinedu's estate, where Mama and Kechi stood outside, waiting. When she saw Ngozi and Obinna, her hands flew to her chest. "My people," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. Ngozi rushed to hug her. "Ah, you look strong. It's been so many years." "All thanks to your son," Mama and Kechi replied. "He gave me back my life." Obinna placed a hand on Chinedu's shoulder. "You did well, son." That evening, the compound turned into a celebration. Neighbors came with food. Chinedu's cousins danced. Amaka played music from a Bluetooth speaker, while Chioma braided Mama and Kechi's hair on the porch. Inside the living room, Ngozi turned to Amaka. "These children," she said, watching Amaka and Chioma, "they're special, so kind, so respectful." Amaka smiled. "They've been through a lot." Obinna added, "They're part of us now. From today, they're Obi family too." Chioma, who was just passing by with a tray of zobo, heard that. She froze. Tears welled up in her eyes as she whispered to Amaka, "Did you hear that? They call us family." Amaka nodded slowly, his throat tight with emotion. 2 nights before the wedding, Amaka stood on the balcony of her apartment, staring at the moon. The night air was cool, her silk robe fluttering slightly in the breeze. Chinedu joined her with 2 mugs of hot cocoa. "For you," he said, handing her one. She smiled, taking it. They stood in silence for a while, the city lights twinkling far below them. Then Chinedu said, "You know that moment at the tap? When I saw you washing clothes, it changed something in me." Amaka turned slightly toward him. "I saw strength," he continued. "Not pride, not pretense, just quiet strength." She sipped her drink, smiling. "You returned a wallet," he said. "But what you really gave me was purpose." She laughed softly. "And you gave me rest." He turned to her. "Marry me, Amaka, not just in ceremony, but in heart, in truth, in fire and rain, in every season." She looked at him with eyes full of love. "I will." They leaned into each other, foreheads touching, the mug warm between them. The wedding day finally arrived. The hall glittered with gold ribbons, white flowers, and candlelight. A live band played soft high-life melodies. Friends from both Nigeria and the U.S. filled the space. Corporate executives, family members, neighbors from Amaka's old compound, and even market women who had known her during her street hawking days. Amaka stepped out from behind the curtain. She wore a simple, elegant gown with lace sleeves and a soft train that trailed behind her like grace itself. Amaka stood proudly beside her, holding her hand like a true brother. "You look like a queen," he whispered. She smiled. "And you look like a prince." As they walked down the aisle, all eyes turned. Chinedu stood at the altar, dressed in a cream agbada with silver embroidery. When he saw her, his face broke into a smile that lit up the entire hall. "You changed my life," he whispered as she reached him. She smiled through tears. "And you changed mine." The pastor beamed. Today is not just a union. It is destiny meeting faith. They exchanged vows, rings, and promises. And when the final "I do" was spoken, the crowd erupted in applause. Tears, claps, laughter. It was not just a wedding. It was a testimony. The morning after the wedding felt like a dream, one bathed in sunlight, leftover laughter, and the scent of roses still hanging in the air. Amaka Okoro, now Amaka Obi, stood in the center of her new living room, her feet bare on the marble floor, staring at the wedding photos pinned to the wall by Chioma. Her heart was full. The day had been perfect, beyond perfect. Every song, every dance, every whispered blessing had landed on her like oil from heaven. Even the guests from her old street had hugged her like she was royalty. And Chinedu, he had not just married her. He had chosen her, publicly, proudly, permanently. Just then, Chinedu walked in, still in his white tunic and wrapper from the after-party. "You're up early, Lolo Obi," he teased. Amaka turned, smiling. "I couldn't sleep." They embraced. He kissed her forehead. "Let's go somewhere today," he said. "Just you and me?" Amaka nodded. "Anywhere you go, I go." They were preparing to step out when Chinedu's phone rang. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Hello." A familiar voice cut through the speaker. "Adora." "Congratulations, husband," she said bitterly. Chinedu's jaw tensed. "Adora, this is over." "Is it?" she replied coolly. "Because I have a different version of our story." "I already know about the miscarriage," he said. "I know you faked everything." There was a pause on her end. "You did your homework," she said finally. "Still, what if I tell someone who doesn't know?" "What do you want, Adora?" "Silence. Then 10 million naira. Or I go to the blogs. I'll tell them you abandoned me, lied to your new wife, and left me carrying a child." Chinedu's eyes darkened. "Blackmail? Call it storytelling," she laughed. "But the public loves drama. I'll make sure your poor little Cinderella sees the headline first." He hung up. His hands trembled, but not with fear. With fury. He had fought for this happiness. Fought hard. He wouldn't let a lie ruin it. "Everything okay?" Amaka asked, stepping out of the bedroom in a yellow maxi dress. Chinedu looked at her and forced a smile. "Let's just take that trip now, please." They drove to Ape, to a quiet resort by the lagoon where the breeze whispered peace and birds sang into the trees. The staff welcomed them like royalty. A private cabin had been prepared ahead, but though the setting was perfect, Chinedu was distant. Amaka noticed. By evening, as they sat under a tree sipping palm wine and watching the water, she finally said, "Is something wrong, Chinedu?" He didn't respond at first. Then he turned to her, voice low. "Promise you won't panic?" Amaka straightened. "Talk to me?" He told her everything, from the day Adora appeared, to the fake pregnancy, to the blackmail call that morning. Amaka didn't speak for a long time. She stared at the horizon, her heart pounding. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" she asked quietly. "I didn't want to burden you before the wedding. I needed proof first. And when I got it, I just wanted us to have peace." Amaka stood slowly. "You should have told me. Not because I can't handle it, but because we're partners now." He stood with her, reaching for her hand. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to protect you like a secret. I wanted to protect us." She held his gaze. I believe you, but this woman won't stop unless we stop her. Chinedu frowned. What do you mean? Amaka's eyes glinted. Give her what she wants. But not money. 2 days later, Ador received a phone call. Meet me, Chinedu said. Hotel Mirage. 6 p.m. Come alone. She showed up in a red dress and dark sunglasses, smug as ever. Chinedu waited in the lounge with Amaka beside him, dressed modestly but radiating quiet confidence. Adaora's face twisted when she saw her. She's here? Yes, Chinedu replied. Amaka stood. You've tried to ruin my name, she said calmly. But let me tell you something. I may not have money, but I have truth. And when the truth stands beside love, no lie can break it. Adora scoffed. What truth? That you're a lucky maid who caught a rich man. Amaka stepped closer. I'm the woman who gave him peace. And you're the one who faked pain for attention. Chinedu dropped a file on the table. Copies of Adaora's forged medical report and the investigator's findings. If I report you, you'll be arrested for falsification and attempted fraud, he said. Adaora's face paled. But we're not here to do that, Amaka added. We're giving you a choice. Disappear, let us live, or deal with the consequences. Adaora's jaw clenched. You think you're better than me. No, Amaka said, but I know who I am, and I know who he is, and I know what we have. Adora stared at her, then turned and walked away. The door shut behind her. Chinedu let out a long breath. Amaka turned to him. Next time, tell me earlier. He smiled. Yes, Ma. They laughed and hugged. The air in the room shifted. The threat was gone, and love had won. A week later, they flew to the United States for their honeymoon. Amaka saw snow for the first time. Chioma cried when Amaka sent her a picture of Central Park. Amaka began applying to top engineering schools, fully sponsored by Chinedu. Mama and Kechi moved into a new 3-bedroom duplex in Auca, surrounded by flowers and love. But even in all the joy and comfort, Amaka never forgot her roots. She would stand on the balcony of their Texas home, hot tea in hand, thinking of that dusty Lego street, the wallet, and the choice she made. One day, Chinedu joined her there. What are you thinking? He asked. She looked up at the sky. I'm thinking about the moment I picked up that wallet. I had nothing, but I had honesty. Chinedu smiled, and that honesty gave me everything. She turned and hugged him tight. And in that quiet moment, under a Texas sunset, a woman who once had nothing, now had everything money could never buy, peace, purpose, and a partner who saw her completely. The first few months in Texas felt like a dream Amaka Okoro never thought she'd be part of. She walked through halls lined with polished wood and glass, sat at dinner tables surrounded by people with Ivy League accents, and received emails with words like, Mrs. Obi, we're honored to have you on board. And yet, she remained grounded. The same woman who once scrubbed compound floors now managed client relations arm of Obi Real Estate Holdings, working closely beside Chinedu to transform neighborhoods and uplift tenants across Lagos, Abuja, and Houston. It wasn't just a marriage. It was a partnership of purpose. One afternoon, Amaka stood before a boardroom filled with potential investors. She wore a forest green suit tailored perfection, her natural hair in a sleek bun. Behind her, a projector displayed the firm's new low-cost housing initiative, Dignity Homes, inspired by her own journey. Our goal is to provide more than shelter, she told them. We want to give families peace, safety, and the chance to dream again. When she stepped down from the podium, the room erupted in applause. Chinedu watched from the side, pride in his chest. After the meeting, one investor approached him. That's your wife? The man asked. Chinedu smiled. She's my miracle. Back in Lagos, things were blossoming too. Chioma had opened her fashion studio in Surulere, a small but bright space filled with color, creativity, and laughter. She named it Chi by Grace. Her debut collection sold out online within a week. Meanwhile, Amaka had secured admission into a prestigious engineering school in Houston, supported by a full scholarship and mentorship from Chinedu's network. He spent weekends helping build housing models for the Dignity Homes Project and shadow construction managers on real estate sites. One evening, as the family gathered on a video call, Amaka raised a glass of malt in front of the camera. "To my sister," he said proudly, "the woman who gave up everything so I could dream." Tears streamed down Amaka's cheeks. "I just did what a big sister should do," she said softly. "But not every big sister is a lion in disguise," Chioma added, grinning. Everyone laughed. Even Mama Nkechi, who joined the call from her rose-filled balcony in Awka, wearing her new reading glasses and sipping Zobo. "I may not have birthed you," she said, "but Amaka, you are my daughter." A few months later, Chinedu and Amaka hosted a small Thanksgiving ceremony in Houston. Close friends, church members, and partners gathered in a lush garden behind their home. The air buzzed with gospel music, grilled fish, and the scent of jasmine. Amaka stood before the crowd, her voice steady and humble. "There was a time I thought life had forgotten me," she began. "But all along, God was writing a story I couldn't see." She looked at Chinedu and squeezed his hand. "I found a wallet. I could have kept it. No one would have known. But I made a choice to do what was right, not what was easy." She paused. "And that one act brought me here." The crowd clapped. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Others whispered prayers of gratitude. Chinedu stepped forward, placing his hand gently on her back. "My wife is the reason I believe in quiet strength," he said. "She taught me that true wealth is not in the car you drive or the title you carry, but in the lives you touch." As they stood together under the golden Texas sky, Amaka turned the crowd with one final word. "If you ever feel like nobody sees you, remember, God does. And sometimes your honesty becomes your elevator." The garden erupted in applause. That night, after everyone had left, Chinedu and Amaka sat on the balcony, watching the stars. Their feet were bare, and they shared a bowl of Puff Puff Chioma had frozen and sent with love. Chinedu looked at her and smiled. "What do you want to do next?" Amaka thought for a moment. "I want to start a foundation," she said, "to support girls in construction, orphan siblings like us, and maybe even housemaids who are often invisible." Chinedu nodded slowly. "Let's call it the Wallet Initiative." Amaka laughed. "That's perfect. It started everything," he said, taking her hand. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "And it'll keep blessing others." A year later, the Wallet Initiative had helped over 300 families. From scholarships to housing support, from vocational training to mental health counseling, the foundation was changing lives. But perhaps its most powerful tool was the message written on every scholarship certificate, every care package, every newsletter. Choose honesty. Choose kindness, even when no one is watching. One evening, Chinedu and Amaka returned to Lagos for a surprise. They visited the very street where it all began, the construction site, now transformed into a modern apartment block built by Obi Real Estate. As they stood by the gate, a little girl ran past them chasing a rubber ball. Amaka watched her and smiled. "I used to be her," she whispered. A security guard recognized them and rushed over. "Madam Amaka, Oga Chinedu, please come inside." They walked into the compound, where several young workers were cleaning and painting the building. One of them paused when he saw Amaka and dropped his brush. "Wait, is it really you?" Amaka smiled gently. "Do I know you?" "I used to hawk bottled water beside your construction site," he said. "I saw you every day. You were always working. And kind. You once gave me your leftover lunch." She blinked. "I'm now a full-time painter here, and I've applied for Dignity Homes vocational training." Chinedu placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You're already on your way, young man." As they walked away, Amaka turned to her husband. "See how one small act can ripple?" He nodded, and it started with a wallet. They both laughed, free, whole, and full of gratitude.